Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. A little bit of news before we get to our guest. First up, Providence schools and schools around the state are going to be closing for the rest of the year. That news out of the governor's office. So no more in-classroom schooling. Governor Runder follows Governor Baker of Massachusetts, who made the announcement in the Commonwealth 2 days ago. There's also an interesting story from some of the top sports stadium experts who looked at the proposed Pawtucket $400 million development that would have a soccer stadium, hotels, and retail. They really question the viability of that project, especially in light of the economic crisis tied to the coronavirus. They also raised issues about when is a stadium experience really going to be come back to what we knew of it before. That's probably far off. As you may know, Governor Gavin Newsom from California has announced that stadiums, sports events, anything of that size, concerts, are out for the rest of the year. Other news, an interesting turn after maybe some pressure from GoLocal, who's complained about it, and also a federal change. The governor is now going to release all the numbers related to the nursing homes. Nursing homes have been the largest element of the number of deaths tied to the coronavirus. Previously, the governor's office and the Department of Health were refusing to release the names of nursing homes who had less than 5 cases. Children and loved ones of those in nursing homes were complaining about that they weren't getting notified and have the right to know, and maybe even the right to remove their loved one out of those environments that have just led to so many deaths in Rhode Island and across the country. Over 10,000 nursing homes have been tied to deaths across the country. Let's now go to Steve Stycos, Councilman at large in the city of Cranston and a candidate for mayor in Cranston. Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Steve, you decided to announce for mayor, I think literally as the entire world shut down. Timing is sometimes conflicted with world events. Talk a little bit about why you're running for mayor of Cranston.
Yes, well, I'm running. I've been on the city council for 10 years, and before that I was on the school committee for 10 years. And I think we need a mayor who is open to talk to the citizens, to listen to their concerns, and to attack the problems that the city has. More specifically, I'm a strong supporter of the public schools and funding them properly, of open space, of diversifying our workforce, which is a big problem in Cranston. We have a 23% minority population, and our full-time workforce is only 3% Black, Hispanic, Asian, or Native American. So those are some of the issues.
And Steve, Cranston's also heavily dependent on retail and hospitality, as we've seen as these massive layoffs have rolled up across Rhode Island. Nearly 250,000 employees and gig workers have filed for different federal and state benefits. That's got to put Cranston in a little bit of a vulnerability from a tax standpoint. How does a mayor help to work to identify those issues and transition his city or her city?
What do you mean by identify those? I agree with you on the issues. I think we're going to have tremendous financial problems with our budget this year is based on a 99% collection rate. So we're not going to have a 99% collection rate next year. We also have a pension fund that has a unfunded liability of $230 million, and that last year only it went up a little bit in value, but only because of gains on the stock market in investments. So we're not going to have that this year. So I think that the first thing that has to be done is you have to assess what position the city is in financially, and then you start making your priorities.
Listen, I think states and cities are hoping and praying that there's going to be a federal bailout to offset the loss of revenue and other impacts from the stock market. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said yesterday that, listen, some states may have to look at bankruptcy. The federal government's not in a position to be able to bail out every state that's in fiscal woes. Rhode Island came into the coronavirus crisis looking at a $200 million shortfall. Cranston has its own realities. What can a mayor do if there's not a major bailout to try and right the ship in these very difficult times?
Well, I think you have to look at spending, and you have to set your priorities. And I think our kids are our top priority, and of course, public safety. So that's really what a mayor can do, and then advocate at the legislature for proper funding for municipalities. But I think you're absolutely right. That's the other, Cranston, like other communities, depends on local aid. And when times get tough, the legislature tends to cut local aid. The other thing that, of course, the mayor does is the mayor negotiates the labor contracts in the city, and that is as it should be, it's the top cost in the city, the personnel. And that's something that I've done a lot of as a representative for a couple of unions. So I have experience to do that and feel I could negotiate fair arrangements with the municipal unions that would protect both their interests and the public interest.
The numbers are looking just so astronomical. None of us during our lifetimes, I think you probably got to be about 100 years old to have seen anything like this in the Great Depression. But right now in Rhode Island, you're looking at upwards of nearly 40% of the workforce being out of work. How can you as a leader help the folks that live in Cranston work through that process?
Well, I think realistically, the city doesn't have the funds to solve those problems. That's it's a federal issue. So I think that the city can be there to support people in their basic services, provide their kids education, and try to make life a little better, whether it's improving parks or in Cranston, we have a rental assistance program that we added money to this year. It helps people on a one-time basis who have a domestic violence problem or are laid off. So, you can do those programs, but thinking that the city is going to be able to solve a double-digit unemployment rate is unrealistic.
Let's go to the landscape. A fellow council member, Mike Farina, has announced that he is a candidate. Mr. Hopkins has said he might be a candidate. I think he's said he was going to make some announcement, I believe today. Who else is running, and what's the landscape for the political battle this summer and into the fall?
Well, those are the people who have either announced, or they're both Republicans, or say they're going to announce. There have been other people who have mentioned kind of floated their names, and I'll leave it up to them whether they announce or not.
It's going to be the most unusual year of campaigning. Before we jumped on the air, I mentioned, I ran for Providence City Council in 1990, and I won by a whopping 16 votes out of many thousands cast, and I won it at the door. I just knocked on more doors and had more conversations with folks than my opponent did. This year, we may not be allowed to go knocking on doors as candidates, and B, I'm not sure anyone's going to answer their door as well as the health issue remains probably in all likelihood into the fall. How, as a candidate who's pretty well known, you're a citywide elected official, but how do you go and have those individual discussions answer questions and concerns of voters in this new world?
Well, I think a lot's going to go on online, whether it's through a platform like yours or whether it's through Facebook. I have a website, stevestykos.com, which I appreciate the opportunity to mention. And so I think that's going to be obviously a major focus of our campaigning, and the mail. I agree with you. I don't think people are going to, and they're not going to want to have a house party with 10 strangers in their living room, breathing aerosol particles.
Yeah. Steve, listen, you've been, I first knew of you way back when you were a journalist writing for the Providence Phoenix, and you were an excellent investigative reporter uncovering very, very significant stories. Has that background been of value to you as you've been a council person into digging into issues?
Yeah, I think it has been, in that I think it's very important to get hard information. So many decisions are made based on hunches or urban myths, and so I think you have to get down into the details. And sometimes things are, as when you're a reporter, they're sometimes completely different than you thought when you started working on something.
I don't think you should be so negative about urban myths. Urban myths always have a value in every community. Let's jump over to fundraising. Every campaign is fueled, those direct mail pieces, your second largest city in Rhode Island, and you've got to drop a lot of mail. You'll probably have to drop, who knows, 10 different direct mail pieces. Those aren't cheap. How do you fund this campaign? Some of those Republicans are pretty feisty fundraisers. That's an alliteration, by the way. How do you compete with them?
Well, you're right. I'm not going to have big corporate backing, as some of them are. I have over the years have developed supporters who are going to be giving me small contributions. I'm going to put a sizable hunk of my own money, my wife and my money, into the campaign. I've just filed my campaign finance report today, which has a $60,000 balance, and that's where I am. And it's going to be difficult to raise money because of the economy, the situation in the economy, and the fact that you can't have fundraisers. So as you mentioned, I scheduled my announcement in the middle of the coronavirus taking off. So the bowling alley where we were going to have it, the pub on the park, was closed, and we had to cancel it. So I'm hoping, again, if people want to give a donation at stevestykos.com, they can go there and make a contribution.
That $60,000, primarily money you're putting into the campaign, that puts you in the game. What do you see as the deciding issues that are going to determine who's the next mayor of Cranston?
Well, I think how this financial situation plays out is going to be important. And also, Cranston is, different neighborhoods have different issues on the city level. I think development in Western Cranston is a big concern to people who live there. I opposed the large-scale solar developments from the very beginning, because I didn't want to see forests and farms destroyed for large arrays of solar panels. I think they belong on roofs, on brownfields, over parking lots. So those issues vary from area to area. People who live around Mashantucket Lake, the state park, are concerned about the quality of that park and the invasive water lily that's taking over. So I don't really see an overriding issue other than the finances, which is, of course, a huge issue.
Steve, Rhode Island schools have been poorly performing in comparison to Massachusetts schools versus MCAS in Massachusetts, RICAS here in Rhode Island. All the testing's been canceled this year. Rhode Island schools, like all schools virtually around the world, have now really, to some degree, lost the year in many ways. It sounds like the administration at the statewide level is going to promote everyone based on a pass-fail structure. Is that the right decision, or should we just take the extra year and say, you know what, you can appeal to go to college or stay in your year, but otherwise, let's take this year and make our school system better. It's the national experts, regardless of what the governor says, almost every national expert says, especially for lower income kids, this is going to be a lost year.
I guess I would have to, I haven't thought a lot about that, and I'd have to listen to some different opinions and get some information to really come up with an intelligent response to that question. I don't know. I know my children got a great education in Cranston. They're adults now, and I am pleased with the school department. But
Steve, last word to you. What should people know about Steve Stycos and why he'd be a great mayor of Cranston?
Well, I've worked to make the city better in my time in public office. And before that, I started the Patuxent Village Farmers Market. I started the only community garden in Cranston, and we're working on a second one in the low-income neighborhood of Arlington. I've advocated for the schools, tried to get them more money each year through the budget process. And I've stood up when it was important to stand up. It was a number of years ago, but the Ticketgate scandal, that when I and others voted against a police contract, and the head of the police union went out and he ticketed my neighborhood and the neighborhood of another opponent of the contract, Paul Arquetto. And we stood up and we said, we want a state police investigation. And Mayor Fung resisted that, but we held firm that that was the only way we were going to get to the bottom of what was going on in the police department. And as a result of that, the chief was allowed to retire. He was later arrested for beating his wife. The number 2 person was removed, retired, and the union president who organized the ticketing scandal was retired. And now we have a really good police department. So that was very awkward and painful. I didn't run for office to expose misconduct in the police department. But when I saw it, I stood up and said, this is wrong. We can't stand for it. And changes were made thanks to what I did and what the other councilman, Paul Arquetto, John Lanny, and Sarah Lee did in voting down a contract that we were suspicious of because it was so expensive and it targeted the money to the upper ranks in the department and left the patrolman hanging. So that's the kind of thing you can, I think, expect from me as a mayor, and I'm going to listen to people. I know I'm not always right, and sometimes I go off in the wrong direction, and I listen to people and they set me straight. So that's what I have to offer.
Steve Stycos, I want to thank you for joining us on GoLocal Live. We will have you back as the campaign develops, and we will be covering this race from beginning to end during this year. For everybody else, here's the lineup today. 12 noon, Dr. Michael Fine, Director of Health. We're going to be talking about contact tracing. Does this really work this late in the process for Rhode Island? New York is advancing it, and Massachusetts. We'll have a conversation about that. Also at 1 o'clock, Governor Raimondo will be back. I believe she's going to formally announce that no in-classroom school for the rest of the year. Everyone else, we'll see you back. Thanks so much, and please stay safe. this afternoon and today. Stay tuned for more updates on GoLocal Live. Thank you.